David Goggins' first book, Can't Hurt Me, was a great success, and personally I used the audio version when working out in the gym on the treadmill. I found it very motivational. I also had it on my Kindle, and I first read it there. Terrific book. He's now published his second book, Never Finished, and it carries on from the publication of his first book into what he's been doing since, but it also does go back into his past in things like the SEAL teams and so on. But one of the interesting things right at the beginning of the book, he's just heard that his book has made top the New York Times bestseller list, and he talks about the difficulty in getting it published, and he was put onto an agent by a fellow SEAL who had his book published, and in this book David Goggins reproduces the letter from the agent, and basically he just says he doesn't think there's any interest in this book at all. No one will want to read it. It's a waste of time publishing it, and thanks very much for your interest. You know, it's not a book worth reading. And to me it just shows that the book publishing industry is one of the most ridiculous industries there is. Remember, these are the people who rejected Frederick Forsyth's Day of the Jackal. Now, I remember the first time I saw David Goggins, it was on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about his early life growing up, and I was absolutely spellbound, as was Joe. I don't think Joe even interrupted him. The tale he told, so just that part, just his early life, was a gripping story, let alone the stuff about being in the SEALs, and also all the long distance races and charity events in his life. And to say that there wasn't anything for a book there is absolutely short-sighted, because Jesse Itzler wrote a best-selling book about training with David Goggins before his name was known. He was still in the SEALs and he couldn't use his name, just called him the SEAL, and that was a terrific book. And also the fact that David Goggins had access to Joe Rogan, that he could go on the show and promote the book, which would make any book a bestseller, with Joe Rogan being such a prominent figure and such an influencer. So I thought that was very interesting. Other parts of the book detail the setbacks in his life since the first book was published, mainly some of the injuries and problems he had. Now, if you look at pictures of David Goggins, and I've put some here, and if you haven't read the book, the first book, you might think that this is a born athlete who you know, has got all the attributes, etc., etc. But you know, from his own admission, he was severely overweight, in a dead-end job, unmotivated and so on, when he decided to turn his life around and become a SEAL. Before he could even join the Navy, he had to lose a tremendous amount of weight and also get his fitness up, and also pass the academic tests. So that was just enough of an ordeal in itself. So in this book he talks about some of the injuries, and you know, he had a heart defect, he had sickle cell and so on, he talked about in the first book. But he has to go for knee surgery. Now he competes in the Moab 240, which is 240-mile race. You know, this is the kind of thing he's been doing. But his knee's given him problems, and he goes to this particular surgeon, and it's basically just to clean up the meniscus. But after the operation and after a couple of weeks of rehab, he's in worse pain and less mobility than he was before. And finally, the surgeon admits that he just tried something off the cuff of drilling two holes to drain bone marrow into the surgical area for some reason. Hadn't discussed it beforehand and hadn't discussed it during rehab, but he finally admitted it, and this had caused lots and lots of problems. So after much soul searching, David Goggins locates a top surgeon in the field of knee reconstruction and basic bone surgery, and Dr. Gommel in New York, and goes to see him, and the doctor's had a look at his scans and so on, and gives him the bad news and says, really, that's it, you're finished, you'll never run again. All we can do is put excuse me, a brace on your leg and hope that does some good. And obviously David's very dejected at this, and the doctor says, well, there's one more thing we might be able to try, he says, and basically what it is taking a section of bone out and putting a metal bracket across it and screwing it in, rather the kind of things that Noel Fitzpatrick, the super vet, does with cats, and really, you know, it should be used more on humans as well. And he said, I'll give you time to think of it. No, he said, we'll go for it. What's the prognosis? Well, if it works, you know, he said, you'll be fine, you'll be able to run. So goes for it, and lo and behold, he starts to recover almost immediately. And the doctor says, yeah, he said, you know, you'll be back running. He said, you'll be able to do everything. He said, the only thing, you know, you won't be able to do is like parachute jumping or something. Kind of just toss that in. But in fact, that's precisely what David Goggins was aiming to do. He was looking at a career being a smoke jumper, which are the people who parachute into wildfires in the mountain areas and forests and manually put out the fires. For some reason, that career appealed to him. Now, he could make tremendous money on the speaking circuit, personal coaching, from his books and so on, but being the type of guy he is, that's what he wanted to do. So the book details how he, one of the things he does is go on a tremendous bike ride, 444-mile bike ride, just to test his knees out, and they're fine. And so he joins the smoke jumping program, which is a 6-week build up and kind of selection in a way. And he finds it by no means easy, even though he's tremendously fit and with all his background and so on. You know, it's still quite arduous. And he was obviously worried about the parachuting, because the first PLF could have finished him. And he hadn't done a great deal of static line parachuting since his basic course with the SEALs, because he mainly did free fall. But it goes well, and he goes into that line. So very interesting things to talk about. He also talks about earlier in his career when he wasn't as motivated, and before he was in the SEALs, he had actually done a spell in the Air Force, and his ambition was to be a PJ, a rescue jumper. And he kind of washed out of that with the water phase, which is a bit ironic considering he later became a SEAL, which is a maritime force. But he talks about going for the air assault badge, which is a 10-day program, which was chalked up as being the hardest in the army. Well, obviously it's not, but it'll be a hard course without any doubt. And one of the things that he had to do was every time you passed the front gate, either in or out, there was a chin-up bar, and you had to do, it was called 5 and dimes. You had to do 5 chin-ups or pull-ups and 5 push-ups. So throughout the day, you know, you built them up. Anyway, the first time he has a go at it, he does his push-ups, and there's a guy next to him, and it's in the dusk, so you can't really see who it is. And then he drops and does his push-ups and finishes, but this guy's still grinding out chin-ups. And it turns out it's a chap called Captain Connolly, who refused to accept minimums. If it said 5, he would always do many, many more. And he led on every race and so on. And he really was the role model for the course. And David Goggins says, admits that he didn't really take on board the lesson that Captain Connolly was showing everyone, that to become the leader, the inspiration, to always exceed, etc., etc. You know, he just did enough to get by. So it's an interesting contrast with later in his life, after he had that revelation about the way his life was going to end up, where he joined the SEALs, and from then on got into the ultras and long distance running, and has become a guy who even other superb athletes look up to and admire. Lots of lessons in the book. The book is written from that point of view where you can learn things, and it's a terrific book, and it's a really good succession to his first book. And in the 2 books, I'm really struck by another hero, and that's his mother, Jacqueline. And this lady went from being an abused wife of a guy who was borderline criminal, actual criminal, who she manages to escape from, taking the children with her, marries another chap who's a decent chap and puts him on the right line, but he gets murdered. And despite all these setbacks, she ends up as an assistant professor of medicine in a college. She undertakes education and works several jobs to do that, and supports David Goggins throughout, and really comes across as a kind of matriarchal equivalent to what David Goggins has achieved. So there's a lot of inspiration in the book. A lot of people around him who support him a great deal. His girlfriend, for example, seems to be a super lady too. And I can only recommend this to anybody who's interested in physical training. And I guarantee it'll make you get up off the sofa and do some actual exercise.